we can't just compartmentalize, right? I'm talking about hamstrings, but then I have to talk about feet and we have to talk about glutes and we have to talk about pelvis. But we're focusing still on like, how can we wake up and get those hamstrings to work more? Hey everyone, welcome to Core Connections, your health, fitness, and wellness podcast designed so you can take control of your health to live the active life you love. I'm your host, Erica Zeal, and for over 20 years, I've been helping women live a healthier, active life, pain-free. And if you're ready to say goodbye to those annoying aches and pains, incontinence, improved diastasis recti, then join me inside my core rehab program. So you too can experience the life-changing results thousands of others have over these last several years and get back to living the active life you love, free from pain. Not only do you get access to learn my exact techniques that have been changing lives every single day, you also get access to me during my live monthly group coaching call. Head on over to corerehabprogram.com to learn more. And for all my movement specialists out there, my Core Athletica level 1 and 2 instructor training courses are now available, along with my pre-postnatal instructor training course. And I am excited to announce my Pilates Reformer level 1 training will be happening in person at my studio later this year. So you can check all that information out on my website at ericazeal.com. And as always, feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions or are looking for more information on anything. You can find me on Instagram at Erica Zeal. Okay, you guys. So today I am really excited for this conversation. It was one that I realized I don't think we've talked about just as a standalone on this podcast. So it's gonna be a really great review and reminder for a lot of you. And for some of you, this may be the first time you're really hearing this information. And that is all about the power of your hamstrings. So hamstrings, there's not a workout that goes by that I'm not teaching people how to be better connected and strengthen their hamstrings. Across the board, we tend to be weak in those hamstrings. Even myself, I am continually working to keep my hamstrings stronger and balanced between right leg, left leg, and what's going on with my quads and my glutes and deep core and all of that. And here's what I hear all the time from people. People are like, but Erica, no, my hamstrings, they can't be too strong because they must be too strong because they are tight. A lot of times we correlate tightness with like being too strong, right? The muscle's too strong, so it's too tight. And the reality is for most people, now this is not 100% of people, because I can see really, really strong people that have, they're really strong. Maybe they actually are pretty balanced in their hamstrings and quads, and they are still tight in their hamstrings. So it is possible that you can be really strong in your hamstrings and be really tight. But for most of the clientele that I work with, and I see that come to me because we were dealing with pain, dysfunctional movement, pelvic floor things, stuff like that, I see time and time again, weak hamstrings, very, very, very weak hamstrings. And so then you're like, well, wait, if my hamstrings are weak, why are they so tight? So this is the body's way of helping to balance your pelvis and balance you out and help keep you standing upright. So across the board, we tend to be really quad dominant, right? Dominant in those quads on the front of our thighs. And if we're dominant in the front of our quads, well, we tend to be really tight in our hip flexors and probably those quads, as well as those hamstrings, because what the body is thinking, those hamstrings are like, oh, well, I have to balance out the legs and keeping this human being upright. So I must tighten because there's not enough strength to actually hold the body upright, hold the pelvis stable. Those hamstrings tighten, and they tighten really tight for some of you. I know this. I worked with you. So, but here's the thing we have to realize is that tightness in our hamstrings many times is actually weakness. I would even say for those of you that are power lifters, those of you that go to the gym and lift a lot, even if your hamstrings are still really tight, there's a chance that they need to continue to be strengthened, and just checking that balance of our hamstring strength to our quads and what's going on in our hips and our glutes, right? There's so many factors. So even though we're talking about hamstrings, we still can't just pinpoint, oh, it's just the hamstrings. But I want to really point out why your hamstrings are so important, because I feel like they get overlooked. And for those of you that come to my classes, do our online programs, I hope this helps to really open up your eyes to understanding even more, because I love teaching you so that you just understand more about why you're doing what you're doing. And then you can start to recognize certain exercises that you're like, oh, wow, actually, I really need to do more of this exercise, insert whatever it is, because it really feels good on your hamstrings. And you're like, I'm really starting to feel my hamstrings firing. And the thing we have to recognize is we need to work our legs in different positions. And one thing I really like, and this is hamstrings are really important when we start talking about pelvic floor deep core function, pelvic function, what's going on with our pelvis, with low back pain, our hamstrings matter because we have these fascial lines that connect from our feet, go all the way up through the inner line of our body, pelvic floor, through our core, and up to our head. So yes, our feet matter as well, but if our hamstrings are really weak and just really tight, could that throw off our pelvis? And it could be right leg and left leg could be different. Maybe you're really dominant on your right leg and your left leg hamstrings over here, like, oh my gosh, I'm trying to stabilize the pelvis over here. So sometimes we're going to see, and I would say actually most of the time, you will notice one hamstring is tighter or is stronger than the other one. And likely your hamstring that's weaker is tighter. And I will hear from people all the time. They're like, yeah, my hamstrings are so tight. I try to stretch them all the time. And so we think like traditional runners stretch, like put the leg up on something, a couch, a bench or whatever. And then we just like round forward and we stretch. Or our hip flexors are really tight, right? Kind of it's that counter pull from our hamstrings. And we go into like that, again, the runner's like lunge stretch. And we're just like deep in that stretch. And you're like, yeah, it's like a hurt so good, painful stretch. You guys, I'm not a fan of either one of those stretches, because if the body doesn't feel supported and we're not activating through our body from a fascial perspective and engaging and lifting and lengthening that tissue, while you might get a little bit of relief initially, most likely in a short period of time, those muscles and tissue are back to like tightening like crazy, because what your body's actually craving is strength in a lengthened position, not just stretching. Stretching leaves our body trying to search for areas to help to stabilize. And that's why we get this tightness and restriction in areas of our body. So stretching, you guys, not a fan of traditional stretching. We've got to focus on opposition and lengthening, all the fascial stuff I talk about, right? Because that's what really helps to unlock your body and get you into this whole new world of really activating, your legs in a balanced way, which is going to have a positive correlation on pelvic floor deep core function, and then what's going on with your pelvis. So I've talked a lot before about that kind of tucked pelvic positioning. And a lot of times I'll see with that, we've got the glutes are tucked underneath and we're really tight in our glutes, and our hamstrings are, again, they're tight, but they're not really working. So we can't just untuck our pelvis, right? We've got to start to wake up those hamstrings so that our pelvis starts to feel like it has support. Then we start to feel that lift more underneath the glutes, and that lifting, that feeling like up underneath the sits bones, like the hamstrings up underneath those sits bones. So if you guys don't really know what I'm talking about here, so if you're sitting on a bench, or if you're standing, you can do it, like just kind of roll around on those sits bones. And so we're sitting on those hamstrings, and then we want to feel like the hamstrings always lifting up underneath the pelvis. So we don't want to overcorrect. We don't want to go into like an extreme anterior tilt where we go into our back. We have to be careful of that. We don't want to overcorrect our pelvis, but we want to start to feel strong up from the feet, through the hamstrings, underneath the pelvis, pelvic floor, lower belly, and all the way up. So you guys can kind of start to visualize that. That can be very, very helpful. So a couple things I want to talk about and share from some movement perspectives is when we're standing, just postural stuff, right? When you guys are standing, don't lock your knees. Locking your knees just tells your hamstrings that they just have to like be on in that tight position to help stabilize you. Softening your knees is going to actually help wake up those hamstring muscles so that now you can they're actually working, right? And we're not also relying on our joints and just our ligaments to hold us up, right? So some other things to think about is I love the ball work, hamstring squeezes. So I've taught this, we teach this one in the programs, really good. You just stand You're going to take the soft heel ball that I have. We put it behind one of our legs. So say you're standing on your left leg, you're going to put it behind your right leg. We do little squeezes like heel to butt. So we wake up the hamstrings. Now, something that you'll notice, and I see it all the time, is most people, I would say like 99.9% of people, their leg that's squeezing the ball, they want to rotate their leg out. Like that knee wants to go out. And that always indicates to me that we need to really work on more of that inner line. I just talk about it as like the inner line of the hamstring, because if we can get the inner line of the hamstring to activate more, you guys will start to feel your pelvic floor in such a better way. Not necessarily like, I do this in air quotes, like stronger, right? Because a lot of us are already walking around with too much restriction in our pelvis and our pelvic floor. So the goal is not to have more quote strength. The goal is to find a deeper connection. And if we can focus on feeling that lifting up through our body and that activation of the inner line of the hamstring up through the pelvic floor, all the way up our body, this can be really helpful. And you'll start to see how the hamstring activation can have a positive effect on our pelvic floor. So when we're doing those little hamstring squeezes standing, you guys want to focus on rotating your knee inward as best you can without taking your pelvis with you. That movement actually needs to come from your hip, and we internally rotate that knee, whatever feels good for our body. Some of you are going to have a lot of internal rotation. Some of you are going to be like, Erica, what internal rotation? I have no internal rotation in my hip. That's okay. We have to remember to work with our body and where we are today. So whatever you can do, even if you're like, I'm barely even parallel with my leg, just start to think about that inner line of that hamstring really starting to activate. Do those ball squeezes. That's a really good way, I find. And you might find that, gosh, I can barely do those because my hamstring wants to cramp. That's okay. Do what you can. Start on your right leg, then go to your left, and then you can go back. You can do a couple sets of those back and forth, right? Then also think about your glutes working a little bit too. So sometimes if we just rely on just the hamstrings working, we get more, our hamstrings tend to want to cramp. So think about squeezing those glutes a little bit too. Now, when I say all of this, like we don't want to just clench our glutes, but sometimes when we're trying to find and activate these muscles and these tissues, we sometimes need to like almost overactivate, but then we want to find a balance in the middle because we don't want to be just squeezing our glutes all the time. Okay. But sometimes we got to just like to wake them up. Another exercise I really like, and a lot of you do this, is pelvic tilts into hip rolls, right? So a pelvic tilt's not working your hamstrings, but that's the precursor, right? To get that deep core on. And then it's those hip rolls. We are starting to get into those hamstrings and activate them. And I love these, and we can do them in different positions, right? So if you rotate your knees in, you are going to activate the inner line of your hamstrings a little bit more. If we're middle, we're going to get more of that middle line of the hamstring. And if we rotate our legs out, we're going to get more of that like wrapping around the hamstrings and the glutes. So I can't say that it, like one is better than the other. It kind of depends on what's going on with your pelvis, right? If you can't even internally rotate, I wouldn't go there right now. I would say like parallel and wide. Sometimes when we go wide and we open up that pelvis and we can start to rotate in. If you're like, oh my gosh, the medial ones help you and you feel it so good up through your pelvis, then that's great. So play around with those hip rolls, and you can do little pulses, like find that range. So the most important thing with the hamstrings is bigger range is not always better. We want to work through a range of motion where we can feel our hamstrings activating. And one key thing that can help you guys is connect with your feet. Press your feet into your mat. So when you're in that hip roll position, right, you're on your back, your knees are bent and your feet are flat, and you're rolling and articulating that spine up and down. When we get to like that maybe middle range, do some little pulses, but think about pressing your feet. You guys use your arches, use your toes. When we can wake up those feet better, you will feel a more effective hamstring activation. And this is why we can't just compartmentalize, right? I'm talking about hamstrings, but then I have to talk about feet, and we have to talk about glutes, and we have to talk about pelvis. But we're focusing still on like, how can we wake up and get those hamstrings to work more? So those are two really easy, gentle ones that most everybody can do. Then if we want to talk about from like kind of a weight training perspective, I do love like squats. I love RDLs. I love even like more of a bent knee deadlift. Like you guys can play around with some of those. I'm not a fan of straight leg deadlifts, so just really focusing on that, keeping that nice bend in your knee, keeping your feet really pressing into the ground. So if we're talking, kind of more on the weight training side, if you guys are in a space where it's safe, you're not going to drop weights on your feet, like kettlebells are great. So that way, if you were to drop it, your feet aren't in the way, right? But try to do some of these exercises barefoot, even if it means you're doing them in your house with minimal to no weight, or maybe just a little lightweight, just to give your body a little feedback. But doing squats, you guys, squats, you should be able to feel your hamstrings and your glutes. Like think of that underside, that like underneath the sits bones, and then work through a smaller upper range. That's where a lot of you are going to start to feel your hamstrings wake up a little bit better. Focus on small, slow range. And some of you that are used to, lots of big range, lots of weight, pull all of that way back and just think of it as like, oh, I'm going to experiment with my body and see what I can feel today, and do it barefoot. Do it barefoot. I don't do barefoot on a wood floor. Like try to do barefoot with a mat underneath so you get just a little bit of feedback. If you guys are most of you all should have mats right at home. If you want a little extra feedback underneath, like those like sticky rolls you kind of put in cabinets to put dishes on so they don't slide around, go get yourself a roll of that for like $5 or $10. And then use that, just roll out a layer of that, stand on that. That's really good feedback, or a double or triple layer. And you can play around with that, but get your feet to work. Barefoot feet, you guys, we do not use our feet enough. I did an episode, it's been a while back, talking about feet. We should link that up in the show notes for you guys. It's a really good episode. Work those feet more time and time again. I see as we get older, I see people as they get older, and there's so much stuff going on with their feet. And a lot of it is preventable. Okay. And it's not just the feet. We got to go and see what's going on with the hamstrings and the pelvis, right? It all works together. But to find our hamstrings, if we're not connected with our feet, can be a lot harder for you guys to find those hamstrings. And so in the squats, right? Parallel, wide, medial, try all those positions. Do never do medial squats with weight. Always, always, always. So that internal rotation, I only teach those without weight, because there's so much we're going on at the pelvis. And if we don't do them correctly, we're going to pull in our back. And that's part of this, is we have to learn how to do these movements, squats, and every movement, in my opinion, without pulling in our back. Our low back should be stabilizing, you guys. It should not be doing the bulk of the work. And if you're doing squats and you're doing RDLs and deadlifts and you're like, man, it's just in my back, then you're not doing them correctly. Number one, drop the weight down, work on your form. And sometimes we have to I hate the word cheat, but kind of cheat our body into like, where do we feel it the most? You might have to bend your knees more. You might have to have a really small range of motion. You guys, I go way back to my early days of training. I've always been big on form, but I've also shifted the way I teach people, and I want them to have good form. Yes. But sometimes what their good form looks like is going to be a little different than someone else, because I need to have them in a very bent knee position. I need to have them, really lifting up through their sits bones. Like I might have to just tweak them a little bit more than someone else who can have a little bit straighter legs, right? It depends on what's going on with their body. But across the board, small ranges of motion. Do your leg exercises barefoot when you can. So that way you're starting to train not only your muscles, but your fascial system more, your neuromuscular system. It'll help your feet, your balance. You guys will walk better. It's phenomenal. And then something like an RDL. I love RDLs for hamstrings. So we start upward, nice and tall. Our knees are soft. Really bend those knees more than you think you need to bend them. Bend them more than you've ever been trained to bend them. And control on the way down to feel those hamstrings doing the work. And then exhale, we pull partway up. And I like to move through a range where you're really feeling stable. And think of it more of like, the word pulsing, maybe not the right word, because it's not fast pulsing. It's like really slow, smaller ranges of motion where we are focused on that opposition through our legs, from like our feet to our sits bones, but we're controlling the weight, the movement in both directions. And we tend in weight training to just really focus on the up motion and then kind of let the weight pull us back down. You guys, You will get so much stronger, so much faster when you control the motion on the way back to your starting position. Okay, because we then are changing that control of our muscles and telling them, oh, we have to control in both directions. That's something I love about the Pilates that I get to teach, is because we're working in both directions all the time. And if people don't have their core on, lightly, again, it's not like we're never bracing, we're never sucking in. It's a very light activation. We're always lengthening with everything, but we're never not working our body. And I feel like too much comes out of the weight training world. We're only really working in one movement or one direction of the movement we're doing. And we can learn to be so much stronger and more connected in our body, and specifically our hamstrings, when we control in both directions, whether that's with a squat, with RDLs, with deadlifts, things like that. Slow your movement down, you guys, decrease your weight, practice barefoot, focus on that opposition and lengthening through your body, from your feet to your sits bones, from your sits bones to the top of your head. And it can dramatically change your training and make your body so much stronger and more connected. And every single time you work out, as in like, I don't know, I would honestly say every single day you should be doing something to get those hamstrings to activate, and it'll start to let those hip flexors to chill out. It'll help you to start to find your pelvic floor and deep core connection in such a better way. Again, remember I said it's not about being like, we don't want to be stronger in a way that like our body is locked. And what last episode I talked about, fear keeping us in pain, and learning to trust our body. This is a little bit of that conversation too. We have to recognize that we have to trust our body in this movement of like, it's okay, even if I can only do a couple reps because my hamstrings want to cramp or they feel really weak or whatever it is. We have to recognize, we have to meet our body where it is and be like, no, but I am getting stronger. We need to tell ourselves that more often and be nicer to ourselves, that where I am is where I am. Like, there's not good, bad, and different. It is what it is, right? And then as we continue to get stronger, we work on them. Like, you guys, if you're not doing pelvic tilts and hip rolls every single day, you should be, because that in itself is so good for our breath, calming our nervous system, connecting us with our pelvic floor and our deep core, lengthening our spine, helping us to rebalance our pelvis, and side note, helping you to wake up those hamstrings during your day. Do those when you first get up in the morning, do them before you go walk, do them before you do your actual workout. We teach them in every single Pilates workout, like every single time. And they show up all the time in our online programs because they are that powerful, even for our pregnant moms. And I will tell you guys, with pregnancy is really good at shutting off those hamstrings. I see it all the time in my mom population, even if it's been like 30 years since you had your last baby. I see that. I had a new client the other day and she was like, kind of chuckled when I asked how many kids she had. And I was like, it doesn't matter how long it's been. If you have never been taught how to rebalance your body, then the body is still likely in a little bit of that pregnancy posture, but we can retrain it to pull it out of that, which is so fascinating to me, because it just, even if you don't have any aches and pains, it can help in prevention. It can just help you to feel so much stronger. But getting those hamstrings to fire, you guys, is of utter importance. Okay, I'll get off my high horse on hamstrings. You guys, as always, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. You know where to find me on Instagram at Erica Zeal, or you can reply to any of my emails that you may receive. And if you guys don't have my free pelvic floor guide, I know if you're listening and you're like, okay, you mentioned pelvic tilts and hip rolls, like, what are those? So that's in that pelvic floor guide. You guys can get access to that. So that's on my website right at the very top. It's ericazeal.com, and it's a free guide. It's some really good basics, you guys. If you don't have it, it's free for a reason. I want you guys to have it. There's so much, just great information that we talk about here on the podcast. I have on my YouTube. We've got in that guide. There's so much great stuff. So just get started. And if you don't know where to start with that guide. It is the best place. So if you have any questions, reach out. And as always, please share today's episode with your family and friends. And I will see you guys back in a couple weeks.